Things Fall Apart is a 1958 novel by Nigerian author Chinua Achebe. It is Achebe's debut novel and was written when he was working at the Nigerian Broadcasting Corporation. Set in British Nigeria, the story revolves around Okonkwo, a prominent traditional leader of the fictional Igbo clan Umuofia, who fiercely resists colonial rule and the spread of early Christianity. All right, so a couple of months ago, during senior AP literature class, I read this novel called Things Fall Apart. And it was, I think, like with all the books I've read in high school, they were all good reads. And I think Things Fall Apart is no different. This novel it follows a very Greek tragedy-like structure, offering morally complex situations that engage the reader throughout. And while I definitely think it is mostly serious in tone, I think at times, minimal points throughout reading the text, it skillfully includes moments of humor and itsy-bitsy moments of comic relief. For example, there was a moment where when the missionaries arrive in like the last act, there's this amusing translation of Jesus Christ as Jesu Christ. That was how it's pronounced, but I don't know. Maybe it was unintentionally hilarious, but for the most part, it is definitely a serious read. And also with like a very not happy ending for sure. If you're aware of how history has played out. But the book itself, it's actually a short book, it's only like 200, like a little over 200 pages. And so it's short, and I do believe for the most part it is well paced. I think it moves along to the point just as it risks becoming a bit too slow. Though I can't say that it is entirely gripping from start to finish. There were moments when I was reading this for class, and maybe it was because it was just for an assignment, but it felt like I made like a huge dent into this book at one point, and then I ended up reading only like 10 pages. So I think sometimes the passages are very dense, but I think it contains enough compelling plot points to fully maintain my interest sometimes. The characters themselves are very difficult to track, especially because they have like African names. It's very difficult to track for sure. And so I genuinely think, I'm sure Achebe probably wouldn't like be up for this idea, but a family tree at the very beginning of this novel would be pretty cool. Like this guide that would enhance the clarity, to see who's related to who, or because there's a lot of character names, and this is not like racially motivated, but a lot of character names sound very similar and are wrote very similarly. So a guide would have helped, I guess. But anyways, getting into the characters, the protagonist is Okonkwo, and he is depicted as this deeply driven by this desire for status, for respect within his clan. Though from the outside perspective and from a reader perspective, this guy's motivations are very toxic, and he himself is a very, very unlikable character. He's, I guess what you would say as an anti-hero, but I would say up until the last act when he's trying to sort of like rebel against the Western colonization tactics, up until that point, he's really a villain, He's super obsessed with masculinity, and he just like doesn't believe in affection. Apparently, so basically, like his dad was this lowly dude who like passed away with these very amounting debts, that like didn't pay off anybody, and just sort of like was lazy, incompetent and stuff. And so I guess in Okonkwo's mind, he was like, I'm going to be not like my father at all. I'm going to be super aggressive, super hostile, demand respect, and just treat nobody with respect whatsoever. Like he literally like, abuses his multiple wives just because. And yeah, he doesn't show any physical love or affection to any of his children. So yeah, I mean, it's not a guy that's really easy to sympathize or root for up until maybe the last act, but yeah. But I guess what I could say is that his rebellion against Western colonization, it's portrayed not only as like a cultural resistance. But from a character standpoint, it's his frustration over personal failure and the lost opportunities for social advancement. The book actually, in a way, is just a character study of Okonkwo. And I do think Okonkwo, like, despite how terrible the man is, you could view him as a very tremendously written character, very complex guy. Even though he barely has any discernible redemption arcs whatsoever. But I would also say, rather than labeling characters or actions as good or bad, the book really encourages readers to consider differing cultural values and understand the structure of pre-colonial African society. There are very nice descriptions of sort of like these wrestling, like in Igbo society, of like wrestling tournaments and growing crops and just like the overall discipline in each family household. So I think it definitely painted like a nice setting and nice picture for sure. And yeah, I think Things Fall Apart overall is just worth reading for both its literary quality and its educational insights into Igbo culture and colonial impacts. The Igbo people, of course, are a real group of people that existed. I'm not sure if remnants of them still exist today. Likely they do. I'm not too familiar with that type of history, but very insightful, of course. And yeah, I mean, the book, like the novel itself, the type of impact it had, Chinua Achebe is one of the first writers. This was written in 1958, I mentioned before. He's one of the first writers to show brutal colonialism of the Western world from an African village standpoint, and not only show brutal colonization, but also how it's disguised as religious liberation. There's like a lot of religious sort of ideologies that are conflicting in that last act. I feel like I keep referencing the last act, but to be honest, like up until that act, like the book does move kind of slow. And you could also make the argument that nothing really happens plot-wise. The only huge plot detail that happens is that Okonkwo has to move his family after he does a very sort of dishonorable thing that forces him to relocate to his mother's land, I think. But yeah, I mean, Things Fall Apart is, I believe, if not one of the most, at least, widely read book in African literature, modern African literature. I believe they actually show this book in schools in Africa, which is cool. So yeah, I mean, that's pretty much all I can say. I guess just going back into the whole unlikable character syndrome that this book sort of permeates. I mentioned before, the main character is very unlikable, so if you really can't get past that, you might not be able to finish this book. Because like I said, he hits women, he is like at least verbally abusive, if not physically. I don't know. But another thing I didn't really like character-wise, which, by the way, the whole Okonkwo thing, I can get by that because I think he's a very complex character anyways. But the female characters in this book, they sort of take a backseat. They're kind of like just known as wives, as female characters, like children bearers. There's not really much personality to them, which I'm sure, of course, like you could also say, oh, it's historical accurate, for sure. From a story standpoint, though, when characters take a backseat, they almost become no personality creatures. They're very desiccated, very dull. And that's sort of the vibe that I got from almost like all of them, if not almost any female character in this book. So yeah, I mean, that's just like a huge flaw that I could point out. So anyways, yeah, I'm going to give Things Fall Apart a 7 out of 10. Again, it was still an enjoyable read. I loved reading this in AP Lit. I loved it for like some of the parts. I shouldn't say I loved and enjoyed for all of it, but still a great book to talk about. Again, I think Okonkwo is genuinely a very complex character. I'm glad that this is one of the most widely recognized books in modern African literature. I think that's a huge win to display colonialism from an African village standpoint. So yeah, that's pretty much it. Hope you enjoyed. See ya.